if you're a fraud analyst, I would embrace AI and learn it and do everything you can to become very good at it because it is the future. Embrace it and learn how to harness it because if you do, you're going to excel over everyone else.
I'm Ronan Burke.
And I'm Frank McKenna.
I'm Brie Valesky, and welcome to Good Question, a podcast for fraud fighters about LLMs, AI agents, and ChatGPT prompts from your friends at Inscribe. Today, we're diving into a powerful question: how are LLMs, AI agents, and tools like Claude's new analysis feature reshaping fraud detection? It's going to be a great way to kick off the year, our first episode of the year. We'll explore how the fraud tech space has evolved over the past 3 decades, what's new and exciting about using LLMs like Claude and GPT, and what a world of frontline fraud fighters managing teams of AI agents might look like. Joining us today is Frank McKenna, a well-known fraud expert and Chief Fraud Strategist at Point Predictive. Frank's also the voice behind the Frank on Fraud blog, a widely respected blog in the fraud space. Welcome, Frank. We are so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about LLMs.
Awesome. And Ronan, of course, you're a co-founder and CEO at Inscribe. Great to have you back. I know these are topics that you're thinking about and we're talking about at Inscribe all the time. So really excited to dig in with you and Frank today.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. And as we think about the year ahead, officially kicking off 2025 with our first episode of the year, today's topic couldn't be more relevant. So let's get started. Fraud prevention, as we know, has transformed with the introduction of new technologies over the past couple of decades. We've gone from manual processes in the 90s to rules-based systems, big data and analytics, and now AI-driven approaches. Frank, you've seen this evolution firsthand. Can you walk us through some of the biggest changes in fraud tech over the past couple of decades?
Yeah, like you said, I've had a chance to watch this kind of transform over the years. And when I started in fraud back in the 1990s, fraud was really pretty straightforward and simple. There were only like 2 types of fraud. There was credit card fraud, if you had a credit card, and there was like check fraud if you had a bank card. But what happened, I think, over the years is banks started to release more products. So they started to release ATM cards and debit cards and ACH and instant payment. And all during that time, fraud got a lot more complicated. But the tech also improved pretty dramatically. When I started, there wasn't really a lot of tech. We'd get a IBM printout every morning, and it had transactions from who charged on their card the most to who charged on their card the least. And it would be like, 20 pages long. And we would just start by calling the first all the way down to the last. And there were no rules or anything. It was just kind of like a rank ordered list. Machine learning got introduced in the 90s, and that really helped. There was a product called Falcon. And then as all these other fraud types started to emerge, we saw tech just get better and better. It wasn't so much investigation-based, but it was really starting to use technology, machine learning, biometrics, device profiling. We just continually made fraud detection more technical and less investigative. And I think that's been, the tech has changed as fraud has gotten more complicated.
Wow, I love that framing of it too, making fraud detection more technical. Ronan, you co-founded Inscribe, obviously. You've set out to also solve a lot of those inefficiencies in fraud detection. How have innovations like network effects and more recently LLMs changed the way you've seen fraud be detected?
Yeah, there are 2 very significant trends along the kind of 4 categories you laid out at the start, from like manual rules-based, big data to AI. But, I think behind all of these is just the enabling factor of more and more data. So network effects, this is enabled by having more and more data, being tracked, stored, and analyzed by these financial services companies. And so on the network effects side, it essentially gives these products a greater understanding to understand, hey, is this pattern a known fraud pattern across other applications we've seen elsewhere in the ecosystem? And if so, it's an extremely valuable way to detect fraud. And similarly on the LLM side, enabled by huge amounts of data flowing through these systems today. But there's a slightly different value and use case for LLMs. On LLMs, it gives us this ability to synthesize and understand information, and now most recently perform and plan actions, which is a very net new capability for the fraud industry, and I think it's going to have a huge impact going forward.
Absolutely. It's so incredible that with network effects, we can pool insights and detect patterns that would otherwise be invisible in all these siloed systems. And with LLMs, the capabilities are just so far beyond only generating text. They can control systems, generate thoughts, and provide fraud teams with these really unparalleled and unprecedented insights. And I think that's one of the really exciting unlocks here. Fraud detection is kind of a data science game. So the ability to share, analyze, and act on fraud data across organizations can be sort of that superpower when trying to stay ahead of fraudsters. Frank, starting at a high level, how are LLMs like Claude and GPT changing fraud detection for Point Predictive and some of your customers? And do you have a preference for certain LLMs over others?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So, a lot of customers, a lot of banks and lenders, that's primarily who we work with. They're fairly cautious with LLMs and generative AI because, you read all these articles like, you're going to violate privacy and things like that because people expose trade secrets through when they do their prompts and things like that. So we're approaching it, kind of internally first at Point Predictive. I run the innovation team. So some of the things that we found that have been really powerful with generative AI is the first is data enrichment, is the ability for us, because we get a lot of non-standard data. Take, for example, on an application, someone puts an employer name. They work at McDonald's. And we've seen that every consumer, every applicant might write that a little bit different. In fact, we have about 500 different spellings of McDonald's that we get on applications. So with generative AI, we can load that data in and we can say, what employer is this? And by the way, I want the standard classification code, the industry code, and a snippet about what the employer does. And the generative AI will enrich that data. First, it'll correct it for us and give us the correct name, McDonald's, and it'll give us the classification code and all of these other pieces of information that can be really valuable that we can then use in the models. Data enrichment is like a fantastic use case in fraud, especially when you're dealing with non-standard data. The second area that we're finding a lot of value is that we can make every fraud analyst a rule writer. Rule writing used to be something that a Python programmer would have to do. You'd have to go to your IT team and say, I want a rule that does, that looks for synthetic identities that are occurring in a certain region. And then the coder would code it up and they would test it and you get it back. But with generative AI, you can make it, everybody can be a coder because you can use the English language. You can merely state in a prompt. And if you give it enough information about the structure of the database in that prompt as well, it can write the Python code for you and you can test it and put it in production. So it's turning something that was very complicated into something very accessible to the fraud analyst. Creating fraud analyst aids, so being able to create, widgets where a fraud analyst can ask a question. Like, I never heard of this fraud type before. Tell me about synthetic identity because I'm writing an email and I want a snippet about what it is. You can just prompt it and it'll give it to you for your emails. The ability to use that for SARs, suspicious activity reports. It's so exciting, all the different ways that you can use it. And I think it's really going to transform how kind of these banks, lenders, and finance companies look at fraud because it's going to really be a power up for them.
I love how you touched on how anyone can almost be a coder right now because with LLMs, the coding language is language, which we're all familiar with and use every day. It's so exciting and the possibilities are just enormous.
I think I heard something to that point, Bree, something this week, and I read an article where the new coding language is English. It's no longer Python. It's English is the coding language because of generative AI. So anybody can become a programmer now.
Absolutely. And even the applications, of course, go far beyond fraud and risk, even though that is our specialty and our favorite topic to talk about. I can use ChatGPT to whip up some HTML for a marketing email that we're about to send. And it does it all in just seconds. It's really just amazing. Based on Frank's responses, how does that align with how you've heard some of our customers who are also banks, lenders, and fintechs talking about and thinking about using LLMs and generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, on one hand, there's like a realization that as a bank or a fintech or financial services company, you need to have a plan with respect to AI and how you're going to adopt it and what you're going to do. That they kind of clearly see there's something going on here and there's a huge opportunity, and they need to figure it out and understand and educate themselves on how they want to act on it. But on the other side, as Frank alluded to, a lot of these companies are still trying to understand like how to do that. Like, how do you get it through security, legal, procurement, to kick off these AI initiatives. When you first introduce your first LLM to the business, it's a big kind of shift in terms of how that company will operate. There'll be a before and after, pre-LLM, post-LLM era. I was talking to a big bank recently, and it actually, like, their fraud team will be the first team to adopt an LLM, and I think that's just a very interesting thing to track over time now, is like which teams within these companies are adopting LLMs first. I think at a lot of companies it'll be maybe the engineering team helping them with a co-pilot to program, but the fraud team I don't think will be too far behind. So that's pretty exciting. And yeah, in terms of use cases, then I think one of the biggest use cases I've seen is knowledge retrieval and summarization. So a lot of big banks and financial services companies have a huge treasure trove of internal knowledge and information, and oftentimes these LLMs that are trained on publicly available data, they don't have all the intricacies of the internal knowledge. But when these companies think of LLMs, like, one of the most compelling use cases is combine that publicly available knowledge with all of the internal available knowledge, and then provide like a knowledge-based retrieval system. But yeah, elsewhere, using LLMs to analyze information to predict trends is also, very common.
Yeah, data analysis and trends analysis as a huge value prop that we're seeing emerge, especially with the release of things like Claude's analytics functionality, which, Anthropic says this means that Claude can work more like a real data scientist, because it can not only write JavaScript, but run the code as well to extract these very well-reasoned, mathematically precise results and analyses. And Ronan, actually, I'd love to hear from you. We at Inscribe do use Claude within our AI fraud analyst, and we chose to go with Anthropic over LLM vendors for a number of reasons. Do you mind sharing a few of those?
Yeah, sure. And in our efforts to choose our LLM, we tested lots of the big providers and the names that lots of folks would already know. But ultimately, we decided on Anthropic, and it really came down to, for the tasks that we needed to solve for, Anthropic's Claude models were best in class. And I think a big learning from this is, like, have your task already kind of specified, and then test it against the various different models, versus just giving these models like general prompts and seeing how well they can answer trivia questions or something. It's important to be precise when you're testing. But then secondly, Anthropic were the most kind of security forward. And that was extremely important for us and our customers. And in particular, they kind of enable you to host these LLMs within your own network on providers such as Amazon. And that's just completely, game changing for our customers and our ability to build a product in the way we want to build it.
Yeah, I appreciate how you honed in on some of the ways to get started or even test different LLMs is with like just one specific task. And Frank, I would love to hear about a couple of specific tasks you've been using LLMs for in the context of fraud detection. You wrote an incredible piece on your blog specifically about Claude's analysis tool. Can you share your experience with testing it with some FinCEN data?
Yeah, so you had asked me previously, like, what was my favorite LLM? And it's Claude. It's Anthropic by far. I think ChatGPT is really good, but Claude has really created an application that's super usable. And they've got projects, which I love. And you can turn a lot of these features on in Claude. And one of the things I really like is an analytics feature. And it just got released probably about 30 days ago. And you have to kind of toggle it on because it's still kind of in beta. But you can take any data set, you get a CSV file, you can pull any data set down, you can load it in, and you can just prompt it with 1 or 2 sentences and say, give me a full analysis of this data, time series, give me charts, and then write me an article of what you're finding in the data. You populate it in, it basically parses it all out, all the JSON code, so you can replicate it later. And then it produces all the charts and it produces all of the findings. So you, in about 60 seconds, you get something that probably would have taken, 1 or 2 days for a person to do, and you're getting it in 60 seconds. And not necessarily that you take this and just publish it out there, but you can use it as a basis of understanding and then kind of massage it in to whatever analysis you're going to do. I find it hugely helpful. I pour through a lot of, white papers and reports, and on the weekend I can do this and quickly get insights that I would have never gotten before.
It's so fascinating to even just watch Claude work. You posted a really cool video on your blog, and to see it, write and run the code all within a matter of 60 seconds. And we're actually going to bring that experience to our audience right now by running an analysis or 2 with Claude live on our episode. Typically, during this part of the show, we bring up ChatGPT on the screen, but because we have our special guest, Frank, and he's been sharing his experience using Claude, we've invited Claude onto the podcast today instead. So, Frank, now that you're sharing your screen, do you want to narrate through sort of the process you just described so we can watch it in action?
Yeah, let's see how this works. Demos are always interesting. So this is the Claude interface. This is actually an application that you can download. And it goes right onto your desktop. So it's always kind of open. You don't have to log in. It's always there. And so what I've done is I've downloaded FinCEN data. You can actually go on to FinCEN and download raw data in CSV format. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop a file. And what I've dropped in there is about 5 or 6 years worth of FinCEN data. So you can see it attached it here. Another cool thing about Claude is you can actually create a style, and the style I've created is called Text Storyteller. And I basically uploaded a lot of my Frank on Fraud blogs, and I trained Claude how to think and talk like me. So Text Storyteller. So it's going to put this kind of in my voice. I'm going to go in and I got a prompt that it's a very simple prompt. What I'm going to tell it is, I said, I need a comprehensive analysis of fraud trends by fraud type and by year over year. Please analyze this file and provide a commentary and 5 to 10 interesting visuals. So the data's there. I prompted it. I'm going to run it. And let's see how Claude responds. This again is in beta, but you're going to see right now what it's doing. It's analyzing the data. You can see it. All the code is being popped up. It's basically parsing it out. It's analyzing that data. And it's creating a comprehensive overview now. So it's generating it. And here it goes on the right. You're seeing all of this work that a coder would have to do if you turn this over to your data science team. So it's running it all here. It's basically parsing that data out. And then it's very quickly here going to start to create what I've asked it to after it parses the data. We'll just watch this go. And there it goes. It's creating my charts. Looks like there's some anomaly. It got total columns, I think, that I forgot to remove, so it's popping up there. But you can see that the trends report by time. It's showing check fraud. We know check fraud's way up, and it picked up on that. It's got industry distribution, probably depository loan or finance company, year-over-year comparison. It gave me a time series. And then over on the left, you can see that it's done all of the analysis. If we kind of hone in, look what it did. It said, based upon the analysis, it said the evolution of financial crime, 2018 to 2020. It gave me all these interesting stats and bullet points. It says business loan fraud saw a dramatic surge in 2020. Digital vulnerabilities here. It looks at that. It gives you seasonal. I mean, pretty powerful that it did all of that in, 90 seconds. Talks about check fraud, COVID-19 impact. I mean, absolutely amazing. And all this can be downloaded here. So I can download the file, laptop, I can publish this. There you go. I mean, it doesn't, kind of magical, right? It's like watching a magician on stage.
Yes, I was just going to say, and even watching it, creating the visualizations on one side and generating the text at the same time on the other side of the screen, it really does feel so magical. And I think it's interesting. Of course, we can immediately see trends that it picked up on that we know are true. To your point, check fraud, that's been a huge challenge that we know a lot of banks, lenders are still dealing with. The surge in business loan fraud in 2020 related to the PPP loans. So it's super fascinating to see all the different trends that it's bringing up. Ronan, what are some of your thoughts on watching this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it enables is we often talk about it in data analytics, like looking over like data sets that are like often too large for humans to feasibly do it. But what's exciting about this is that how fast it can do it and how well it can do it, and the types of analysis companies can now do because it's like economically and technically feasible to analyze data. Whereas previously we're like, oh, maybe we should reduce the scope of this analysis so we can get it done in a certain period of time. Now we can just analyze everything, or even like just, analyze like constantly and then proactively alert users of changes in data. And these things can just be running like 24/7 over huge amounts of data. And I think it's just like fascinating, the new types of products and the new types of work to like previously unsolved problems that technology like this can open up.
Yeah, absolutely. Frank, do you mind scrolling down to some of the seasonal trends that it picked up? I always find that really fascinating. Okay, yeah. Saying, peak periods typically occur between August and October, and then secondary spikes March and April. Super interesting. Lower activity during December, January, which I think probably makes sense over the holidays. That actually aligns with what we see in our data at Inscribe too. We always see a spike around that March and April time period. Does that resonate with you as well, Frank?
Yeah, tax season, right? A lot of fraud occurs in tax season. There's a lot of identity theft with the IRS. There's a lot of government fraud. There's a lot of people that are getting those checks in the mail, so check fraud goes up, and there's a lot more people that are getting money once a year and they're committing fraud to boost their application. So it lines up perfectly. And I think that's another thing about LLMs that especially Claude, that I really like, is it can pick up these discrepancies that sometimes make sense and sometimes don't. And sometimes when they don't make sense to you, it's what the data is showing you. So I know like forensic investigators that they went back and they pulled accounting fraud that they investigated 10 years ago, and they load the data into Claude and they see what Claude would have done 10 years ago. And what they inevitably find is that the results are almost the same as what they found, but Claude picks up on things they missed. So you can actually use these in investigations if you load enough data to really uncover things that even the human eye might not see.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, it reduces, human error, and it just can detect even the smallest little spike or trend that, to your point, Frank, the human eye might miss. Do we mind? Can we scroll down to the bottom? I was trying to see if it had like takeaways. Okay, forward-looking insights. That's really interesting. Frank, do you mind kind of like reading some of these for our audio-only listeners?
So I think these are right. Digital channel security. The dramatic increase in ACH-related suspicious activities suggests a critical need for enhanced digital security. Absolutely. Those are your instant payments. Those are your, app fraud in the UK. All of that is exactly right. Business lending controls. The surge in business loan fraud indicates a need for more robust verification, particularly during crisis periods. Absolutely correct. I think from experts I talk to in business lending, it's a lot of these lenders are woefully behind. They haven't had the tools that the consumer lending has had. I think they nailed it on that as well. The data suggests fraudsters are increasingly sophisticated and exploiting multiple channels. Absolutely correct. We see that all the time now. Check fraud and debit cards with the linkables. We're seeing that as well. And then seasonal patterns, being able to basically staff up based on the season when fraud's mostly occurring. We're in the midst of that now with holiday shopping season, right? You have to staff up during December. Those reports, those SARs won't come in obviously until next month, but you got to staff up now.
And what's really cool too is you can still even ask Claude questions now based on this analysis. What's an example of a question you'd ask here, Frank?
Why is there a big spike in the chart in 2024? I'm going to see if it picks up that it's a total column. It basically shows in the preview, if you remember this, and maybe let's see what it says. It appears I need to refine the data process. Okay, so it's going to try to correct it. Let's see what it does. This is a demo. So, all right. So it basically, it did fix the chart a little bit there. So that's the thing about this is you can refine this and refine it, which I like. I could say, what about check fraud? Any recommendations? See what it'll say. And it'll tell me something. It's writing me an article. So it's writing me.
It wrote you an article even with an emoji and a snappy title too.
Yeah, it's going to give me, did it give me an emoji? The hidden patterns of check fraud in the digital age. Fascinating paradox in financial crime. Okay. 12,000 reports, 2020, 15 to 18. Okay, so it's got it all here.
Yeah, very cool. It goes into the history of check fraud. It talks about technology and then forward-looking insights. Wow. It's a really comprehensive answer.
It's very, very comprehensive. Yeah. So it's cool.
And it's just so cool how it adjusted the chart and it realized that there was an error and it did that in real time. With a human analyst, they might have to go through all of the data all over again and figure out, what that error in the data was, and to watch it immediately recognize it and then reconcile that is just, it's so cool.
It never gets annoyed.
Yes.
It always apologizes.
Yeah, it does.
It's great. Yeah, it never gets offended either, because sometimes I may ask it the same question 20 times and it never gets offended. It'll apologize and restate it, and yeah, that's what's cool about it.
It's so cool that the LLMs can adapt in real time. The time saved is it's unbelievable. Okay, now we're asking, is there any specific spikes you want to point out? Let's see.
So it's going in, it found several suspicious spikes concerning financial crime patterns. Yeah, so ACH fraud, business fraud, mass marketing fraud, nearly doubled. Okay. So yeah, picked up on all the spikes.
And again, giving some helpful recommendations and forward-looking insights.
Yeah, always does that.
Yep. That's very cool. Ronan, any final thoughts from you on all of this?
Yeah, I think the question now becomes, how do you harness all of this technology and bring it into the workflows of risk teams and fraud teams? Especially the shift from this is a conversation right now, but how do you kind of translate these systems into autonomous AI systems? We've been thinking a lot about this at Inscribe, and I think the industry at large has as well. And so, yeah, there's something here, but how do we operationalize it?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which, Frank, I really want to hear your thoughts on, which is AI agents. So, Frank, last time we spoke, you said, I think it's just going to change everything. So, what excites you about AI agents? And also, how would you describe them to your peers? They're still kind of a new and abstract concept for us as an industry and even a society.
The way I look at it, and I think this is, everybody needs to think of themselves as, you're a sole provider to your company. You work on your fraud analyst and you don't have people reporting to you. But the way I think about us moving forward is everybody's going to be a manager of AI. And you could, one person, have 10 or 15 or 20 PhD level experts who can work very quickly and do things for you. And those people are basically AI agents. And so an AI agent is kind of a widget that's going to do something very specific using the power of AI through APIs or through screen scraping or through doing certain tasks over and over again. I like to think of AI agents as like the next generation of, we called them macros back in the 90s, where you basically code something. You want screens to do something, like you want to update a note on a screen. So you teach it how to go from a screen and what to write. And then you save that, and that macro will run later. I think AI agents are that, but just supercharged. So to me, you can't even begin to get your mind around all the different ways you can use these AI agents. And I know you work a lot on this, and Ronan, you probably have a lot of things that you've thought about, but there are platforms out there where you can actually create your own AI agents, and you can hit different APIs. They're relatively new, but these AI agents, I think, are going to change everything. These platforms where you can basically instruct it. I'm really excited about it, but honestly, I can't even get my mind around how much it's going to change everything, because the possibilities are literally endless.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm very excited, and it's still even so hard to imagine what our lives and our careers are going to look like in 6, 12, 18 months based on all the things that we don't even realize yet that AI agents may be able to do. We are building our own AI risk agents here at Inscribe. Ronan, I'm going to toss it over to tell our audience a little bit more about that. Give us a taste of what agentic features we're using powered by LLMs and what big innovations we've introduced to our AI fraud analysts so far.
Yeah, and thanks, Frank, for the introduction on agents. And the industry is still trying to grapple around a definition that aligns with all the various different use cases and industries. But one that I particularly like is agents are autonomous software systems that can achieve goals and adapt to changing conditions through feedback and learning. For us at Inscribe, that's like a very kind of ambitious and like a clear end goal. But like, what does it mean today, and what are the steps towards that? And for us, we've been asking this question of, okay, what features and problems can we solve today with the technology that's available today and understandable today? And for us, there's 3 big pieces of work. One of them, as we discussed before, is just natural language explanations of the fraud that we're finding with it or a product. And so these natural language responses are very easy for our end users to understand, and then accordingly they can make faster decisions from reading those. Secondly, we've been using our agentic systems to perform application reviews and corroborate information between various different pieces of information. For example, if you have textual information from an application form, corroborating that against what might be on documents or publicly available information. It's very mundane, repetitive work, but agents are extremely good at this. And then finally, and perhaps most agentically, we've been using these systems to perform web research. For example, looking up the business, the address, and the individuals and the connections between them, searching for adverse media or any kind of negative sentiment online from business reviews, and many other data points as well. And then, most importantly, extracting and taking out the key insights from those and delivering them to customers. And so those are the kind of 3 very practical areas we've been seeing a lot of value. But going forward, there's a huge amount of legs left in the potential of these systems. So we're working every day to build new types of solutions in this space.
we've seen with our AI fraud analyst and the corroboration aspect is we'll see someone submit a pay stub where, first we run all our document fraud detectors on the pay stub, check for anything like misaligned text or masking or anything that might indicate that it's a template from the internet. And we'll see where none of those fraud detectors will detect any signals of risk, but then the AI fraud analyst will search online and find that the business that this pay stub came from actually closed at the beginning of the year. So it's actually not a valid proof of income document, but that's not information you would have found on the document itself. So just the ability for an AI agent to look across all those different data points and understand the context and then surface that as a risk signal is really cool, in my opinion. Okay, when we talk about AI and implementing these AI tools within our workforce, we have to ask the question, Frank, I'm going to go to you first. Do you think LLMs and AI agents eventually may replace human fraud analysts?
Not at all. No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think it'll change what fraud analysts do. I think it'll enhance what fraud analysts do. But I think that you're always going to have the human in the loop. If you think you're going to get rid of the fraud analyst, you're not. And I've heard this for many years, even going back to like 1998, when chip cards came out in the United States. It was like, oh, now we're not going to need fraud analysts because chip cards is going to solve fraud, right? Yeah. The only thing that AI is going to do is shift what a fraud analyst does, not eliminate it. So I don't see that happening at all. I think you're going to see smarter fraud analysts that are going to take on more like rule writing and some other things that they couldn't do before. So I would embrace AI. I wouldn't, if you're a fraud analyst, I wouldn't reject it at all. I would embrace it and learn it and do everything you can to become very good at it because it is the future. We're not going to change that. Embrace it and learn how to harness it because if you do, you're going to excel over everyone else. That's why you're always telling everybody is learn this. I myself, I have every subscription to almost every AI you can get. 11 Labs, HeyGen, Claude, ChatGPT, I've got them all because I want to learn it and I want to figure out how to use it. I mean, to me, it's important.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's like, I think the most likely scenario that's going to unfold here is that fraud roles will maintain as just a key part of like the industry. And if anything, I think like the number of roles will actually continue to increase. And, a lot of companies today are often resource constrained. That's like they would like larger teams, but they often might not have the budget. But with these AI systems, they can, increase productivity. But also, I think as well, effectiveness will generally increase on the fraudster side as well. So, it might be an interesting cat and mouse game. But yeah, I think in terms of the impact for fraud analysts today, I think it'll enable them to automate away the parts of the job that are very repetitive and not necessarily what they're best suited to, and allow them to focus on what they are best suited to as humans in more complex, higher order tasks. And, I still think there's like a bit of like a figuring out to do in terms of what tasks are humans good at and what tasks are machines good at. There's some that are kind of like in like a gray area in the middle. And I think like there might just be like a collaborative requirement there between humans and machines to just constantly be involved in those tasks. And finally, then, I think it is inevitable that like for companies and teams, individuals to stay ahead, they will need to adapt to this changing trend. I think it is pretty clear to see that like companies that adopt this technology, they're going to deliver better customer experiences more efficiently, and then just like pull ahead of competition. And so, what we don't want to have in the US financial services system is a divide of like AI adopters and those that don't. It'll just, be too, devastating to get a large portion of the US financial services system. And, oftentimes it might be correlated with, like the bigger financial services companies are the ones who can invest in this technology. And we don't want that to just be the case. We want like the long tail of institutions to also benefit as well. So that's going to be something that I'll be watching out for as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better than what you both said. And I am very excited for a future where, frontline fraud analysts can really have that co-pilot experience where, like we were seeing with Claude, they can communicate with AI assistants and it'll make their jobs more efficient and more effective. And so I'm optimistic for risk teams for sure. All right, it's time to move on to our lightning round question. Frank, Ronan, I'll go to you in that order. What's one tip that you would give teams in 2025 for getting started with AI and LLMs?
I'll give 2 tips. The first I would do is subscribe to newsletters that talk about AI. I mean, that really helped me. That was my initial kind of foray. There was a lot of newsletters, some of the ones that I subscribe to, Neuron. There's a few others, but they really educate you on everything that's happening in AI. And the second I would suggest is to get a subscription. Maybe you give it to a manager or 2 and have them, ChatGPT or Claude, and just give them access to that and some training of how not to use it and how to use it, and start to explore those tools to open your mind and your imagination about it, and just start to embrace it in a small way until you get comfortable with it. That'd be my advice, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, Frank, on your point. I think education and giving folks an understanding and appreciation for the magic here, and like they don't need to do this on like a huge data set. They can just, if they have a challenge at work today, you create an agenda for a meeting that they're facilitating. Like those very simple tasks would be helpful for appreciating the magic of it. But yeah, if I was to add an additional tip, I'd say, if you get beyond that, initial kind of educational piece, and you are aligned and you do want to adopt AI in some way, the next thing I do is, try scope out a project, not a huge project, just a small one that can add business value using AI. And, perhaps it could be like analyzing historical loans or, applications that you've approved using some kind of already existing and available data, and see what you can learn from that. And see what the team thinks, and then, start from there, and then keep on adding, to the scope from there. And I think starting small is still a very good way to get tons of value from these systems.
Yeah, I agree. Just even experimenting and having a little playground where you can ask it to do small things like creating an agenda, or ask it to do larger things like analyzing a data set. And even I think that's what we've been seeing at Inscribe is it'll figure out through sort of that experimentation process what it's good at, what it's not so good at, where maybe you still need to do a couple more prompts or even just refine the final output, because it's not going to be perfect at everything right away. And slowly you'll be able to see how you can adopt it in your day-to-day workflows. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Good Question. We hope you are ready to jump into 2025 and take advantage of the enormous opportunity LLMs present. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Sure.
And
we can you're going to edit all this kind of.
Absolutely.
Hey, y'all, I'm Ronan.
I'm sorry. I was just to go then me, then you.
Sorry. Okay, Ronan. You're going to say Ronan Burke.
So I go second names are included. Okay.
Yeah. We'll go Ronan Burke. Frank, you can introduce your name. I'm Frank McKenna, and then I will go and I'll lead us.
All right. Yes. I messed up the script. Okay.
No, it's okay. I swear.
We have so many cuts of this. This is the most difficult bit.